The eyes of the NBA world were on the Toronto Raptors as the trade deadline came and went. OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam, Gary Trent Jr. were all set to be available. Several ancillary pieces like Malachi Flynn, Kem Birch, Chris Boucher were also set to be available. The Raptors are comfortably outside the playoff picture. It was said that the Raptors were willing to rebuild around Scotty Barnes. Instead, they make a move that has a lot of people confused about the direction of this team. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what has become a bit of a trend with this front office, Masai, Ujiri, Bobby Webster, over the last 3-4 years, and whether or not it's right or fair to start being extremely critical of this front office. If you're new around here, my name's Robert. This is Pinsari Basketball. Grab your coffee. Let's get to it.
Yeah, it didn't happen. A really rough stretch. Growth is not linear, so sometimes we've played a little selfish. We used to give them some chance. The playing at that time was the playing. I believe in the players. I believe in the coaching.
I believe in the organization. I believe in them individually. I believe in their talent.
There are times in the season when we got a little bit too individual.
Yeah, it's tough to, celebrate too much the victories. Went down to the end there, I think we knew what we were going to do. It would have been difficult for us to sign him in free agency. This group could go. It didn't make as much sense, but some of that chemistry come together with the team. The true evaluation, I think, for this team will be at the end of the season.
To fans of the NBA 90s and 80s, you will remember Jack McCluskey as the architect of the Bad Boy Pistons. He served as an interim general manager for the Toronto Raptors, holding over the period between Glenn Grunwald and Rob Babcock. I remember McCluskey talking about the Rafael Rougeau pick, the pick that is often sort of miscredited to Rob Babcock. And I remember him talking about that pick with such optimism. There's this 24-year-old guy with basically negative wingspan, a below-the-rim athlete, doesn't finish overly well. He saw Bill Laimbeer. And it was enough for him to pass up on Andre Iguodala. Now, when I think about the biggest misses in Raptors draft history, most people think about Andrea Bargnani over LaMarcus Aldridge. I would argue that Andre Iguodala was a better player than LaMarcus Aldridge and that Rafael Rougeau was a considerably worse player than Andrea Bargnani. So, in terms of the biggest misses in franchise history, I think Rafael Rougeau has to be number one. But it was still surprising to me at that point. It felt like I was being gaslit. I'm sitting there listening to this great, esteemed NBA executive talk glowingly about this 24-year-old rookie out of BYU. And I'm wondering, what am I missing? I've seen the tape. I don't think this guy's an NBA player, but who the hell am I to know? I'm an 18-year-old kid. Who the hell am I to say that this guy is wrong? I think that's a common misconception among people, is to say that being great at one point in your life means that you're great forever. Let's talk about those bad boy Pistons. Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, Bill Laimbeer. Bill Laimbeer's become a decent coach, but that backcourt of Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars, interesting. Both became general managers, executives. Isaiah Thomas with the Toronto Raptors drafting Damon Stoudemire and then moving on to the Knicks and proceeding to basically handicap that franchise for the better part of 10 years. And Joe Dumars, we were willing to look over the fact that he passed up Carmelo Anthony and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh in the draft to pick Darko Milicic because they won a championship that same year. But man, you start thinking about the moves they made after that championship. It was just keep the status quo. They let that core age. Eventually, they made trades that baffled everybody and free agent signings that baffled everybody. They lost their touch. Charlie Villanueva, Josh Smith, Allen Iverson. These are just a few names. They traded a still very serviceable Chauncey Billups to the Denver Nuggets for Allen Iverson. That was an F grade. And it wasn't one of those things where it made sense in the moment and then it sort of backfired later. No, this was, what the hell are you doing? And then it turned out really stupid. So how did Jack McCluskey, one of the most well-respected general managers in the NBA, in NBA history, incorrectly assume that Rafael Rougeau was going to be better than Andre Iguodala? How did an executive who put together the second wave of this hard-nosed Pistons team that I loved so much, Rasheed Wallace, Ben Wallace, Rip Hamilton, how did he know? How did he know to put that team together and then not know how to rebuild beyond that? How did Isaiah Thomas, one of the smartest basketball players of all time, put together the disaster that was the New York Knicks in the early 2000s? How did he follow up one bad move with another bad move with another bad move? How did Michael Jordan, who knows basketball better than I do and probably ever will know, how did he draft Adam Morrison, Kwame Brown? How did he make so many mistakes? There is an assumption that being great means you will always be great. It's simply not true. Jerry West and Danny Ainge are exceptions. Steve Kerr is an exception. These are three people who have been great on multiple levels for a very long period of time. Being great for a very long period of time requires constant reevaluation of yourself. When I heard Masai Ujiri in a press conference say, "Is it me?" Ironic, given that he's quoting LeBron James. Is it me? Same thing. Maybe it's me. I think that's a step in the right direction. So let's talk about the Toronto Raptors. Masai Ujiri, Bobby Webster are one of the most well-respected core duos in the NBA as far as executives go. Whenever there's a move or a draft pick made by this brain trust, it is seen as, okay, might not make sense right now, but let's wait and see, right? It's ironic how many times people have thought, I don't know about that, and it's turned out to be right. They were very right about Scotty Barnes. I was very much on board with that. They've been right so far to some extent about Christian Koloko. I think he's flashed a lot of potential. But over the last 4 to 5 years, I think a lot of the moves that the Raptors have made could be seen as very questionable. Why do we brush over any critique of Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster with "you don't know, trust in Masai"? These are all hashtags, you know? Who the hell am I? Once again, I find myself kind of being gaslit here because I was very critical of the Rafael Rougeau pick when it happened. Vince Carter was too. That's why he demanded a trade. I think that was the final shoe to drop. And looking around and saying, this was projectable. This was obvious. That pick was seen as a massive reach. It's one thing to, draft a Jalen Suggs if you're Orlando and everyone says he's a top 4 guy and you pick him top 5 and it just doesn't work out. And you're like, well, we were wrong, but everyone was wrong. It's another thing where everyone says you're wrong and then you end up being wrong. The Raptors have always been independent thinkers. But for the large part of Masai Ujiri's tenure, that independent thinking has been good. So let's evaluate sort of critically the tenure of Masai Ujiri. First of all, in 2013, the Raptors tried to move Kyle Lowry. That is a fact. Number one, it's Brian Colangelo, whom you should credit for Kyle Lowry being here in the first place. It's James Dolan, who you should credit for Kyle Lowry staying here because he was so butthurt over that initial Andrea Bargnani trade. So he ended up basically backing out of that deal. That deal would have eventually cued DeMar DeRozan asking out, and the Raptors would have rebuilt. The Raptors eventually trade Rudy Gay to initiate a tank, and they reverse tank. They can't even tank right. So that, to me, sometimes you get something out of an accident. I don't think the Raptors were expecting to suddenly turn around their season because Gravis Vasquez, Chuck Hayes, John Salmons, and Patrick Patterson were such great players. No, I think they absolutely thought they were getting back, a bunch of flyers and nothing burgers for, a very flawed star player in Rudy Gay, and that this would cue a tank. And instead, they start We the North. And of course, now that you started this momentum and you sold it to the fan base and you've created this entire wave of momentum around it, well, you have to keep putting it back together, right? It doesn't matter how many times you get bounced in the first round, second round. It doesn't matter because Kyle, DeMar, this core has to work. It's the cash cow. MLSE is a business and Masai Ujiri is a business executive. For all the Brian Colangelo slander, I think you guys owe Brian Colangelo a little bit of a thanks for that because Brian Colangelo got Kyle freaking Lowry for less than what you just paid for Jakob Poeltl. Can we be real about that? You got Kyle Lowry for the same thing that you got, almost the same thing you got Thaddeus Young for. Can we be real about that? Kyle Lowry was a starting point guard in the NBA who had all sorts of potential in his prime. Got him for a first round pick. Right around 2017, the Raptors lost Jeff Weltman. Now, it's not uncommon for an executive to leave and, for things to change a little bit. But I think it has been very interesting to watch the Orlando Magic. That same year under Jeff Weltman, they drafted Jonathan Isaac, a pick that I absolutely loved. And if you can't see the parallels between Jonathan Isaac and OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam and Scotty Barnes, if you can't see the parallels in that thinking, you're crazy. There's a lot of parallels between what the Magic are doing and what the Raptors are doing. Difference is, the Magic seem to be really good at it. They pick up Bol, a type of asset that you would expect the Raptors to be all over with their whole Vision 6'9" plus wingspan, but the Raptors don't get Bol. They pick up Wendell Carter. They move off of Nikola Vucevic right when he's about to become an albatross contract. They draft Paolo Banchero first when conventional wisdom says, don't. Draft somebody else. They make the right pick. Over and over, Franz Wagner, the reclamation project that has been Markelle Fultz. The Orlando Magic are not a great team, but they are a team with a clear future and a clear direction. And kudos to Jeff Weltman for that. Raptors, on the other hand, are a team that is completely confused between timelines. They are a team that has improperly valued their own assets, overvalued their own assets. Yet they continue to get a pass, and I still hear Masai, Ujiri, Bobby Webster still considered top executives in the league, even though back-to-back deadlines they have lost to historically one of the top executives in the league, R.C. Buford, in a trade. Thaddeus Young was not playing for the Spurs. They end up waiving. They were probably going to waive him just for lottery picks. You end up giving a first-round pick. And that first-round pick, perhaps correctly or incorrectly, people are like, hey, David Roddy, Walker Kessler, these are really good players. You could have had one of those guys. Instead, you have Thaddeus Young. Aaron Baines, letting Serge Ibaka and Marc Gasol go for nothing. Not re-signing Danny Green and allowing him to be a starter on a championship team as you commit to this vision of 2 6-foot backcourt, which did burn you absolutely. Not having Danny Green in the playoffs did hurt. Continuing to insist and try to put this square peg into a round hole. No, Pascal Siakam is a superstar, even though in 4 years straight as a first option, you have never really had playoff success with him at all. The one time you made it out of the first round with him, he wasn't the best player at all. You made it in spite of him. You made it against a Brooklyn Nets team that was absolutely horrible in the bubble. Do we remember that? And in the second round, you play a competitive series against Boston. Again, in spite of Siakam. I think that this front office gets a lot of credit for moves that they made 6 years ago. If you look at the last 4.5 to 5 years of transactions, apart from drafting Scotty Barnes, a top 4 pick, I'm not seeing any home runs. Do you? Do you see any home runs? Do you see any home run trades where you're like, oh my God, the Raptors absolutely won that? Stanley Johnson, they reclaimed him and he turned out to be absolutely great. Aaron Baines, yeah, they banked on him replacing Marc Gasol, and that just turned out absolutely phenomenal. This is a front office that has consistently waited too long to make decisions that were obvious to most people who analyze basketball. I think it was pretty obvious in 2015, 2016 that DeMar DeRozan was not going to be able to bring you to a championship. Why wait till 2018, 2019? That's 3 years. That's 3 years of playoff exits. It was obvious that Dwayne Casey was not really great with adjustments in game, that his offensive system was not sophisticated, which feels funny saying that now because we're watching Nick Nurse kind of do the same thing. Why was Dwayne Casey here for so long? It was pretty obvious, right? The Raptors almost lost Kyle Lowry for nothing. San Antonio backs out. They don't offer him what he wants. The Raptors overpay. They keep him. They don't trade him at the deadline. A year and a half later, they don't trade him at the deadline. Now, here's a question worth asking. If you had dealt him at the trade deadline for Goran Dragic and Precious Achiuwa, which was an offer that reportedly was available to the Raptors at the deadline, you could have declined Goran Dragic's team option. which means you would have never even had him on your books. But the Raptors waited. They didn't want to trade Kyle Lowry midseason. I don't see them getting any flack for that. But they should. Aaron Baines fell off a cliff. I could at least understand the logic of making that play. But Khem Birch, overvaluing Khem Birch to the point of giving a guy who had flashed real NBA potential for like 20 games in a lost season where no one was really trying, to give that guy a 3-year guaranteed contract and now have to basically move off of multiple seconds just to get rid of him. The DeMarre Carroll contract, that was under Masai Ujiri as well. I think the Toronto Raptors are an above average organization in terms of management, in terms of drafting, scouting, etc. But I think for those people out there who think that this team is above critique, that we need to give 5 years for every single move to turn out, to see how it turns out, I think that you lose that when you do what they've done for the last 4 years. I think you lose that benefit of the doubt. I really do. I'm not of the what have you done for me lately camp. I do believe that the championship deserves some credit because they made some very tough decisions. That a lot of things have to go right for an NBA champion to become an NBA champion. A lot of things had to go right for the Toronto Raptors. Kawhi had to buy into your whole thing. They did everything possible to make that happen. Congratulations. Still took on an injury-riddled player who did not want to be here, who could have easily, and I do mean easily, after he sustained a bit of pain in that Milwaukee series, said, you know what? My home, my destination is LA. I'm sitting out for the next round and y'all can try to beat Milwaukee without me. That could have happened. His shot against Philly could have bounced out and the Raptors lost in overtime. That could have happened. And Kevin Durant could have come back and gone absolutely berserk, and Klay Thompson could have been healthy in the finals, and that could have happened. There's always going to need to be a sufficient amount of luck for any team to win an NBA championship. However, it is very different to build a champion on a house of cards like the Toronto Raptors did, where literally you have one shot to make it all work, and if it doesn't work on the exact way that you want it to work, I think if the Raptors get bounced against Philly, is Masai on the hot seat? Is Fred VanVleet enemy number one? Because he shot like 10% for that entire series and Nick Nurse just kept playing him. That championship wipes out so many mistakes that this team has made. I think about championships like the Golden State Warriors, right? Where there was like real thought and architecture put into that roster. And everything was built for these long windows. And those windows were often extended by smart signings like Sean Livingston, Kevon Looney, really brilliant drafting. Like the Warriors had to be like 10 for 10 for like 3-4 years to put that together. I don't think the Raptors were 10 for 10 ever, but the Raptors did put together a really good championship core. I mean, lost in all of this is that the Raptors managed to win that championship without one of their top 8 players in OG Anunoby. He missed the entire playoffs, and they didn't even play him. I think that's lost in all of this too. So yeah, we can talk about the good luck. We talk about the bad luck too. That was some bad luck for the Raptors. And I'm pretty sure if the Raptors had gotten bounced in the second round, everyone would be talking about how much they could have used OG Anunoby to replace Fred VanVleet in some of those minutes that he played. Sure. Credit where credit is due. The Raptors did win a championship. That was, however, 2018, 2019. We are currently sitting in 2023. At some point, what have you done for me lately? Masai Ujiri is compensated as a top paid executive in the NBA. I think that his body of work is significantly above average. As a scout, as a general manager, he's made some good decisions. He's also had some phenomenal luck, okay? I think too often, one man gets miscredited with the work of big organizations, big teams. The titles are convoluted. The Raptors making this trade, this is two deadlines in a row. It doesn't make sense. Is this payback? Thank you for Kawhi. Here's a first round pick. Here's another first round pick. Is there some sort of contract that we're just going to give first round picks to San Antonio every single, trade deadline? Thaddeus Young wasn't playing for San Antonio. Did it change anything? Do you think the Raptors wouldn't have made the playoffs without Thaddeus Young? I think they would have made the playoffs. I think they would have gotten bounced in the first round. That's exactly what happened. Was it really worth getting off a first round pick just to get his bird rights, was that so significant for this team? I'm sorry, like Patrick Beverley, this is the level of, player. Like, you don't give up first round picks for Patrick Beverley. You don't give up first round picks for Thaddeus Young. First round picks are really valuable. Team control for 4 years, in a league where those, especially for a team that's so good at drafting, how are you looking at this roster, seeing how much talent has gone out the door? You traded Jakob Poeltl. Granted, you got him back now for a first round pick, but you traded Jakob Poeltl. You traded DeLon Wright. You lose Kyle Lowry. You get back Precious Achiuwa. Granted, that was something. You got something back for Kyle Lowry. You lose Marc Gasol for nothing. You lose Serge Ibaka for nothing. You lose Danny Green for nothing. You lose Kawhi Leonard for nothing. You know how much talent walked out the door over the last 4 years for the Toronto Raptors? Oh, but you can't disappoint the core. You can't move Serge Ibaka because he's so integral to the core. Even though at the deadline, hard to imagine, the season that he was having or the season that Mark was having, that one of those two guys couldn't have fetched you a first round pick. At least a first round pick. They're NBA champions. Is there not a team out there that is desperate enough to move a first round pick for one of those guys? It's difficult to watch Danny Green be a starter on the next NBA champion after you leave him to walk for absolutely nothing. It's difficult to trade Norman Powell for Gary Trent Jr. under the premise that he's going to be the cheaper option and then basically sign him to a worse contract than Norman Powell signed. The thinking is flawed. There's a bit of a curse of being successful, is that eventually, if you are successful for a long enough period of time, you will sustain a healthy amount of brain drain, where other organizations will look at your roster and they will start to poach talent away from you, and you will significantly start to lose scouts, head scouts, and you'll need to promote from within. And hopefully you don't stop pressing your foot on the gas, because it's a slippery slope. Now, Masai Ujiri was on the record that the pandemic and Tampa set the Raptors back several years. I didn't fully understand what he meant until I saw that they drafted Malachi Flynn. And that's when I started to realize that bubble shutdown, the Tampa season, really has taken the wind out of this team's sails in a lot of ways. And making this move for Jakob Poeltl just feels like a final straw for me. I mean, I was willing to be patient. Christian Koloko was a pick that I liked. Precious Achiuwa is developing fine. OG Anunoby has been good, albeit I'm not blaming him for being frustrated with his role on offense. Fred and Pascal is a pain point for me. You got to look at this trade deadline. Two things. Number one, Fred VanVleet has apparently decided to just hijack this offense. I mean, granted, he's been playing very well over the last month, but we're moving further away from Scotty running point and Pascal running point forward, and, basically Fred playing Freddie ball and, gunning for a contract. And you are allowing this to happen as a front office, as a coaching staff. You are allowing this to happen. Now, are you doing this for Dame Lillard? No. You are doing this for a player whose value around the league is so limited that the LA Clippers would not give you Terrence Mann in a first-round pick. So what are your hopes? What are your hopes in the offseason? To continue the facade and the myth that he is the next Kyle Lowry? Oh, the same Kyle Lowry that almost signed with San Antonio, the same Kyle Lowry that you almost traded, that Kyle Lowry. You have shown considerably more loyalty and more faith to Fred VanVleet than you ever showed to Kyle Lowry. And I hope that loyalty and faith does not translate to a $35 million or $30 million contract, because that would be crazy. For a guy who can't even get you Terrence Mann on a first round pick. Really? That's who you guys value so highly. The undersized guard whom has failed in every single playoff performance he has ever been given a chance to, with the exception of the finals against Golden State, where he played very well. He has been a flop. Go look at the playoff series. Go look at the playoff performances. This is the guy that you want to roll with. This is the guy that you want to give a platform to aggressively bet on himself. You owe him something. You think you owe him something? Pascal Siakam, same thing. I want you to consider the following. I do not believe that there is a very big gap between Mason Plumlee and Jakob Poeltl. I want you to look at what Mason Plumlee was traded for and what Jakob Poeltl was traded for. Just actually look at it. And ask yourself, what is the gap between these two players? Because when you look at the return that Charlotte got, and look, Charlotte is a terrible team, San Antonio is a terrible team. Neither one of these teams want to keep players who are helping them. And Mason Plumlee and Jakob Poeltl both impact winning for both of these teams. And these teams are trying to tank because they're not stupid. They want Scoot, they want Wemby, and most likely one of these teams is going to get them. Look at what San Antonio got back for Jakob Poeltl. Granted, he's 27 years old. Mason Plumlee's 31, 32 years old. I get it. Mason's older. Jakob can still be part of your core. Can he? I don't know. A big who does not shoot. If you wanted to just to satisfy your curiosity about what the Raptors could do with a competent two-way center who clogs up the paint and doesn't shoot threes, why not go for Plumlee? Probably a hell of a lot cheaper, right? I, for one, believe that if you're a Raptor fan and you operate under the mindset of, trust in Masai, Masai can do no wrong, I think you have about 4 years of evidence now. It's not one single pick, it's 4 years of evidence that he can do wrong, and he has been wrong a lot lately. Now, I know it's not a popular move to be openly critical of what is widely considered one of the best executives in the NBA. I was very upset when it sounded like there was some cheaping out by the Rodgers board, by the Rodgers family member who did not want Masai Ujiri, thought he was overpriced, didn't see the value. I understand that organizational stability and, sort of a check against impulse and impulsivity is very important. I understand that specifically because of past regimes. And I think as Raptor fans, especially if you've been a lifer, you've seen the Rob Babcock era, you've seen the tail end of the Brian Colangelo era, you've seen some, pretty bad ideas put into play for the Raptors, right? I think the Raptors are coasting on interest right now. The value of OG Anunoby, the development of OG Anunoby, etc. Oh, we can get 3 first-round picks. Look how great we are as an organization. We drafted this guy in the 20s, and now we can get 3 first-round picks that are all, 20 or above for him. That's great asset management. We signed this guy to a super low-end contract. This guy is literally 2 months away from demanding a trade from this team. You have to look at that. You have to look at this organizational culture. You have to look at how this might be the most that a Raptors team has ever underperformed in franchise history relative to the talent on paper and the talent in theory and the expectations coming into the season. And to see this front office say, no, we're going to throw a Band-Aid on this instead of just count our losses and just accept that we just got this wrong, is the type of move that I would have expected from Joe Dumars, Jack McCluskey, and Isaiah Thomas from the Knicks. Mortgaging the future is the type of move that impulsive, short-sighted general managers and basketball executives make. Regardless of whether or not the Raptors are able to turn around their season, it is pretty clear to most people that the projectable upside on this roster is a first-round or second-round exit. We were told that the hope for this core was that they could advance beyond the first round. Seems very hard to do, given the Raptors are currently 5 games under 500. Even with a softer schedule coming up, even if they are able to catch Miami and end up with the 6th seed, it doesn't really make a difference, does it? Because at the end of the day, the Toronto Raptors have mortgaged so much of the future to help a core that isn't working. Did they do this for Dyson Daniels? Did they do this for Trey Murphy? Did they do this for some player on a... No. They didn't do this for a player on a rookie contract. They didn't do this for some elite shooting youth prospect. No. They did this for a center who does not shoot threes, does not score outside the paint. Regardless of how I feel about Jakob Poeltl, and I am a very big fan of Jakob Poeltl, this move for this roster at this time has to be considered an absolute screw-up. I look forward to being proven wrong. This would not be the first time that a move that Masai Ujiri has made has been deeply unpopular, and it's turned out to be the right move. But this would be the first time that I have disagreed with an unpopular move, and it turned out to be wrong. Dark days to be a Raptor fan, I got to tell you. It feels like the Raptors are on the precipice. The reports are wildly conflicting, and I don't think that the press conference really clarified it. If you believe the reports that the Raptors were dangling Fred VanVleet, you're in no man's land. You're exactly where you swore you wouldn't be. Masai Ujiri is a very bold guy. He sometimes says things that maybe he shouldn't. And he said, play-in for what? And people have quoted that 1,000 times. Well, you're headed for the play-in. He said, we don't want to be in no man's land. You're in no man's land. And you're saying maybe it's you. I have a lot of conflicting thoughts. We watched that live stream. On our live, we watched the Masai Ujiri presser, and I had so many conflicting thoughts bubble up. The one thought that just kept coming to my head is, greatness is not forever. Every great has a peak. Every great has a decline. And given the significant financial, obligation and investment this organization has made in Masai Ujiri, Bobby Webster, and this core, and given the potentially significant investment that this core is on the verge of making in a roster core of Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam, potentially to lead them to the promised land, I really, truly hope that this organization does not take this fan base to be eternally stupid. I feel it bubbling. I feel the frustration on the fringes. And I'm telling you, if you're an MLSE executive and you end up catching this, or if this video ends up catching a vibe and it ends up catching an algorithm and it gets 100,000 views and it really gets widely out there, whether for hate or love, I'm sure this is going to get a lot of dislikes, because being critical of this team and this organization is a very hard thing for this franchise to tolerate. I swear to God, y'all are going to have your foam fingers for your, oh my God, Raptors won a championship in 2018, 2019, forever. In conclusion, every great has a peak. Every great has a decline. Some people sustain their peak a little bit longer, but the decline will always come. I don't like being in no man's land. As a fan, it is extremely frustrating. I need something to look forward to. I need hope. I need a product on the floor that I can actually watch, that I think is not boring or painful to watch. The Raptors' product on the court is absolutely painful to watch. It would be one thing if everything was hunky-dory in terms of the product on the court and they were just losing. The Charlotte Hornets are more fun to watch than the Toronto Raptors. The Detroit Pistons are more fun to watch than the Toronto Raptors. You think that's a hot take? Go watch a Pistons game. You really think watching Jaden Ivey buzz up and down the court is less exciting than watching Scotty Barnes set picks for Fred VanVleet to launch 35-foot shots? Really? For real? You think 35 ISOs for Pascal Siakam as he dribble, pounds the ball and inevitably takes a fall away, fade away, and, goes into the paint and drives and saying, and one, 500 times a game. You think that's exciting? You think that's exciting basketball? You guys must not watch basketball. It's becoming really hard to root for this team long term. I hope they have a plan that does not involve moving more first round picks. I really hope that they get this 2023 first round pick right, because I tell you right now, they just moved off a second round pick in a deep draft. I really do like the second half of this draft, especially if you end up being bad. If this Jakob Poeltl thing doesn't work and, the spacing is as bad as we expect it to be, even with the soft schedule, you could end up giving or conveying the 39th pick or the 40th pick. That could be a serviceable player in this draft. I'm telling you, it could be. You not only give that away, you give up your right to trade 2024 draft pick. You can't trade your 2023 draft pick until draft night. You can't trade 2024. You can't trade 2025. I mean, my God. What if Shai Gilgeous-Alexander demands out this summer? You have hedged so aggressively. What if next season isn't as great as you think it is? Because I'm certainly convinced that you did not think that this season was going to be as bad as it was. And for the vast majority of the season, the Raptors have been firmly in the lottery. What if the same thing happens next season? You're banking on some growth from Scotty that doesn't come. You're banking on some growth from Pascal Siakam. He gets injured. You're banking on, the kumbaya and the vibe to return to the locker room and guys are still disgruntled. What if you are, once again, You know, as teams at the bottom get these great lottery picks and they end up being better, what if once again we are at this time next season and the Raptors are 5-6 games under 500? Can you imagine the potential of having to look at your roster and saying, not only did we give up a 2023 draft pick, the second round pick, not only did we give up 2025 second round pick next year, but we are about to surrender a top 10 pick to San Antonio, and we are praying that we end up finishing top 4 in the lottery so we don't have to convey it. Can you imagine the anxiety that you have set this franchise up for Jakob fucking Poeltl? I'm done. If you like more spazzy videos, feel free to check out our past videos. There's plenty of those. If you like video breakdowns, be sure to check those out. I will plug it in here. I did interview Scotty Barnes, trainer. It was a fantastic interview. If you haven't checked that out, definitely check that out. Video link is in the description. Make sure to hit subscribe, like, not a hater. I love the Toronto Raptors. Followed this team for 22 years now. I love this team, okay? 22, 23 years, 24 years. It's been a while, okay? Followed this team practically my whole life, okay? I just don't agree with the direction this franchise is taking. And I think that if you look at what returns were rumored to be coming back for Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet, I think the majority of the league is telling you that they agree with my assessment of these two players and not yours. So if you're a Raptor fan, wake up, okay? Because I'll tell you right now, if you wake up and you smarten up, they can't sell this. They can't sell this to the fan base, okay? But if you buy that Fred VanVleet is the next Kyle Lowry, even though when he's objectively not, he's not the same type of leader, they're going to keep trying to shove this down your throats, okay? So enough of you wake up, the product will get better. So I suggest you evolve your mind, go listen to Thinking Basketball podcasts, go watch other smart content, be open to being critical. It doesn't make you not a fan. That's my final parting message to you. Just because you're critical of something your team does doesn't mean you're less of a fan, okay? We're not saying that this person's a terrible person or they should, they should be in the G League or I hate them. No, it's just critique. Critique is okay. All right. If you have a child out there and your child, eats chocolate bars for breakfast and you're like, I can't be critical of that, you're a bad parent. That's just reality. Okay. So make sure to hit subscribe, like if you haven't already, leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you think I'm overreacting. And as always, I'll catch you next time. Peace.